For more than 6 centuries, the Tower of London has been the casket of stone that protects the most precious treasures of our kings and queens. Every night, the yeoman warders and armed guards of the tower watch over these most precious objects. Secured and locked away are the crowns, scepters, orbs and emblems of our monarchy. Queen Elizabeth entrusts only her most loyal subjects with custody of the keys to her royal treasures. Crown jewels. The jewels have a dramatic history. Their fascination is founded in historical fact and interwoven with legend and myth. When the present queen was crowned in 1953, she was the latest in a line of sovereigns stretching back to the Saxon King Egbert in the 9th century to be crowned in a coronation ceremony. By the time King Edward the Confessor was crowned in 1043, the coronation ceremony had evolved and is virtually unchanged today. From the time of Edward III in 1327, the sovereign's jewels have been kept here, firstly in the basement of the White Tower, but later, in the early 16th century, a special jewel house was built on the south side of the tower. The crown jewels have not only a ceremonial purpose and a symbolic significance, their enormous intrinsic value meant that they could be used by medieval kings as security when raising armies and fighting wars. Because this country is known as the United Kingdom, it is easy to forget that it has not always been so. There was a stormy period of civil war in the 17th century, when Britain briefly became a republic. During those years, between 1649 and 1660, Oliver Cromwell, as victor of the Civil War, ordered that the crown jewels, as symbols and trappings of the monarchy he so despised, be broken up. The metal was then melted into coins, and the jewels were sold to generate revenue. But although Cromwell's orders were largely carried out, at least part of Edward the Confessor's crown is thought to have survived. It formed the basis of the crown which was made for the coronation of King Charles II on the restoration of the monarchy in 1660, and has been used at every coronation since then. In 1967, the importance of the crown jewels within the scheme of things at the Tower was recognized by the merging of the role of resident governor of the Tower with that of the keeper of the crown jewels. The present incumbent is Major General Tyler.
The crown jewels are an absolutely magnificent collection of treasures. They've been acquired over the centuries by different kings and queens and added to the collection from time to time. They're the main reason why over 2.25 million visitors a year come and see us in the Tower. Now, of those items that are part of the coronation regalia, every single one has got a deep historical and religious significance. They're all used as a key part of the coronation ceremony, and every one of them is carried in the coronation procession by some official or other.
The maces, for example, are ceremonial versions of close protection weapons. There are 13 in all, and 2 of these are used at the state opening of Parliament. 3 swords of justice precede the monarch up the aisle. They are known as the sword of temporal justice, the sword of spiritual justice, and the sword of mercy. The sword of mercy, or the katana, derives its name from the 7th century legend of Ogier the Dane, who was about to strike the son of Charlemagne in revenge for the murder of his own son, when an angel appeared and pushed aside the sword, declaring, "Mercy is better than revenge." So the sword of mercy has a blunted end. Like much of the regalia, these swords were made for the coronation of Charles II, though the blades are much older. The Great Sword of State is a giant, two-handed 17th century sword first used at the coronation of James II. Then comes St. Edward's staff. This is placed on the altar where it remains throughout the ceremony which follows. After the acclamation and the first part of the service of Holy Communion, the sovereign is anointed with oil using the ampulla and spoon. It's a holy moment, shielded from congregation and television cameras alike. The gold eagle's head predates the Restoration body by some 200 years. It's thought it may have been saved from the destruction ordered by Cromwell and hidden by a pious member of the clergy. The spoon is considerably older and was probably the one used at the coronation of King John in 1199. The monarch is then presented with the golden spurs made for Charles II and signifying chivalry. Then the jeweled sword of state is presented. The monarch offers the sword to the altar. These armills, bracelets of sincerity and wisdom, were made for the present Queen's coronation and were a gift from amongst the Commonwealth nations of the day. So too is the stole, though the rest of the coronation robes are much older. They are based on the cloaks of the Emperor Charlemagne and are made of gold thread weighing 23 pounds, 10 kilograms. They were designed for George IV's coronation in 1821, and since that time have been worn by the majority of the monarchs. Queen Victoria was less of a slave to convention and abandoned tradition for practicality, deciding her fragile frame could not support them.
There are two questions that we get asked more than anything else. The first is, what is their value? What is their price? Well, the short answer is that they are absolutely priceless, in the literal sense of the word. They've all been categorized and counted, but there's no way you can put a cash value on them. Apart from the fact that you couldn't resell them, the historical value and the royal connection value couldn't possibly be assessed. So that's what we say, they are priceless. And the second question is, are they the real ones, or are the real ones hidden away somewhere else and these are substitutes? Well, we wouldn't go on protecting them the way we do if they were substitutes. And if you're in any doubt whatsoever, come and have a really close look at them for yourselves, and you won't be left in any doubt at all.
Many of the other pieces of the coronation regalia date from the Restoration and were made to replace those dispersed by Cromwell. They were made not as beautiful showpieces, but as symbols of temporal and spiritual power, whose true significance can only be seen at the coronation of a sovereign. The coronation proceeds with the presentation of the crown jewels to the sovereign. The orb was another of the precious objects made for the coronation of Charles II. It's a hollow gold sphere weighing nearly 3 pounds, 1.3 kilograms, and signifies Christian sovereignty over the earth. A second orb was created for Queen Mary, who reigned together with King William of Orange as joint sovereign. This orb was used at the 4 subsequent coronations, but since the accession of George IV, the original King Charles orb has been used. The coronation ring, sometimes known as the wedding ring of England, and dating from the coronation of William IV in 1831, is then placed on the 4th finger of the right hand. This tiny coronation ring was made for Queen Victoria, but by a misunderstanding, it was made to fit her little finger. The Archbishop insisted on forcing it onto the correct finger, and it took 2 hours and much ice to remove it. The scepter, or rod with the dove, was made for Charles II and represents the sovereign's equity, while the scepter with the cross represents temporal power. Though dating from the same period, this was rebuilt in 1910 to accommodate the largest and finest cut diamond in the world, the first star of Africa. In 1905, an unknown black diamond miner working at the Premier Mine in South Africa came across the largest diamond ever seen by man. The mine superintendent passed it on to the Transvaal government, who in turn, 2 years later, presented it to Edward VII to mark his 66th birthday. The cutting of diamonds is a skilled and precise job. The uncut Cullinan stone weighed 3,106 carats, and the king had to cut it into 9 big and 96 smaller diamonds. It has been said that the jeweller, Joseph Asher, who was entrusted with the awesome task of cleaving the diamond, fainted after the experience. The largest cut stone went into the scepter with the cross. the second into the imperial state crown, and the 7 others are now the personal property of Her Majesty the Queen. When the monarchy was re-established in 1660, a new jewel house was created in the Martin Tower. The keeper of the regalia, Talbot Edwards, was entitled to show the regalia to strangers for a fee. Visitors were shown into the lower room and the jewels were taken from a cupboard for inspection. This rather lax policy lasted a mere 10 years, until the actions of a certain Colonel Blood led to a review of security procedures. Blood was an Irish adventurer who had already made unsuccessful attempts to seize Dublin Castle and to assassinate the Lord Lieutenant of Ireland. It was in 1671 that Blood disguised himself as a clergyman in order to win the trust of the keeper, Talbot Edwards, and his family. Blood arranged a meeting early one morning and was accompanied by 3 friends. On arrival at the tower, Blood suggested a visit to the crown jewels. Once in the basement, Blood and his accomplices bound and gagged Edwards, threatening him with a dagger. Blood then seized the crown and battered it with a mallet, flattening it so it would fit under his cloak. The villains then fled with the crown, orb, and scepter, but on leaving the tower, they were unexpectedly interrupted. Mr. Edwards' son happened to arrive home on leave from the army in Flanders. The alarm was raised, and 3 of the 4 thieves, including Blood, were captured, and all the jewels recovered. All of England awaited the execution of Blood and his fellow conspirators, but it never happened. King Charles II roared with laughter when he heard the story and said he would speak to the man himself. Blood confessed the attempted theft and threw himself upon His Majesty's tender mercy, suggesting that a certain Irish affair would lead him to temper justice with mercy. It is not known what, if anything, Blood knew of the King's involvement in the Irish affair, but the implicit threat certainly seemed to work. In the tradition of the blunted katana sword, Charles did indeed exercise mercy rather than justice. Blood was not only pardoned, but had his confiscated Irish estates returned to him, and there he lived out the remaining 9 years of his life in comfortable peace, rather than in the Tower, which might have been his all-too-brief home. Much of the Tower's history is recorded in the names of its sites. The main shop stands on the site of the old Lion Tower, a name which marks the 600-year-old association between the Tower of London and the Royal Menagerie, prior to its removal to the Regent's Park in 1834, and Mint Street, the area between the inner and outer walls of the Tower and the site of the Tower Mint, the only mint licensed to produce gold coins. It flourished here from the mid-13th to the early 19th centuries. St. Edward's crown is placed on the sovereign's head at the moment of coronation. Traditionally, the crown was set with semi-precious stones hired from a jeweler for the purpose. But since the coronation of King George V, the same stones have remained in place. Its symbolic value, as the crown which has crowned 14 kings and queens, way outstrips its immense intrinsic value. The imperial state crown is the most beautiful of all the items in the coronation regalia, and probably the most valuable. It was made for Queen Victoria in 1837. Looking after this, and indeed all the crown jewels, are skilled and responsible tasks. Garrards have held this royal appointment since 1843. Knowledge and enthusiasm for the collection is an integral part of looking after it. The present crown jeweler is David Thomas.
Yes, it certainly is a privilege to be involved with the care of this unique collection, especially its most recognizable piece, the Imperial State Crown, which is worn at the end of the coronation and the state opening of Parliament. It contains 2,800 diamonds, and on top here, in the middle of the Maltese cross, is the sapphire which is said to have come from Edward the Confessor.
According to legend, Edward the Confessor wore it on a ring. On his way one day to the consecration of a chapel, he was accosted by a beggar. Since he had already given away all his money in alms, he slipped the ring off his finger and gave it to the beggar. Many years later, 2 pilgrims fresh from the Holy Land returned the ring, which had been handed to them by an old man with instructions to bring it to England. They said he had claimed to be St. John, and had told them that a long time before, in the guise of a beggar, he had received the ring from the hands of the king. He congratulated the king on his generosity and promised that they would soon meet again in paradise. Edward died soon afterwards, in 1066, and was buried with the recovered ring on his finger. When his coffin was opened 200 years later, his body was found in a state of perfect preservation. The Abbot of Westminster slipped the sapphire off his finger, and the stone has been part of the crown jewels ever since.
Then there are the 4 pearls hanging from the center here, known as the Hanoverian pearls. Originally, they came from Pope Clement VII, who in turn handed them on to Catherine de' Medici and then to her daughter-in-law, Mary Queen of Scots, when she married the Dauphin of France in 1559. The French ambassador of the day described them as 6 long strings of pearls with 25 single pearls, as large as nutmegs. Queen Elizabeth then bought the pearls, and they passed through James I to his daughter, Elizabeth of Bohemia, and on to her daughter, Sophia, the Electress of Hanover. They were then handed down through the Hanoverian line until they came into the possession of our Queen. She and her mother both have strings of pearls made from them. Now I would like you to look at the stone in the front of the crown here, known as the second star of Africa, cut from the Cullinan diamond. It replaces the Stuart sapphire, which was put to the back of the crown. All gemstones are millions of years old, of course, but this is certainly the oldest cut stone in the crown. It can be traced back to the Scottish crown used at the coronation of King Alexander II of Scotland in 1214. It's thought it came into the hands of English King Edward I at the same time as the Stone of Scone, the traditional coronation throne of the Scottish kings, which is now in Westminster Abbey. If we turn the crown around again, you will see what is probably the most famous stone of all, known as the Black Prince's ruby. However, this is not a real ruby, but a spinel, a semi-precious stone. If you look very carefully at the top, you will see pierced a very small real ruby. Traditionally, a red stone in the crown is meant to bring the sovereign luck.
In the 14th century, Castile was ruled by the terrible and aptly named king Pedro the Cruel. One day, one of the Arab chieftains who still ruled Spain, Abu Sa'id, came to surrender. Pedro welcomed him affably, having heard that Abu Sa'id had with him jewels of great value, including a matchless ruby. He invited the chieftain to dinner, and during the banquet, had his servants killed, while he personally stabbed Abu Sa'id to death. The famous ruby was found on the corpse. While his subjects and his illegitimate brother rebelled against him, Pedro called England to his aid in the person of the Black Prince, whom he then rewarded with Abu Sa'id's ruby. Thenceforth part of the crown jewels of England, it was worn by Henry V on his helmet when he crushed the French forces at Agincourt in 1415. Later, Richard III also wore the ruby on his helmet at the Battle of Bosworth, where he lost his throne and his life.
As Crown Jeweller, I am responsible for supervising the cleaning and maintenance of the whole collection. Our experience goes back over many years. For instance, Henry Phillips has arrived here at the Tower since 1953 to work on various pieces, including the Imperial State Crown.
There's never ever a time when one doesn't get a thrill working on this magnificent crown. I wear these gloves to protect it. I first came in contact with this crown in 1953, when it came into the Garrard workshop to have these arches remodeled to their present form. I was also given the task of taking great care of the second star of Africa, and I did take great care of it too. Every year we find some little thing to do on this magnificent crown to keep it up to its present standard. For instance, 2 years ago, I had the job of taking out the 4 top stones in the fleur-de-lis. They hadn't been out of their setting for 150 years. The 4 behind got cloudy. I had to take them out very carefully, clean the foil, and reset them. And I'm pleased to say it was very successful.
Perhaps intrinsically the most valuable of all the crowns in the royal regalia has been worn only once. This is the Imperial Crown of India. It contains 6,000 jewels, many of them presented by India's Maharajas. Because an Act of Parliament decreed that no crown may leave the country, a safeguard intended to stop kings from pawning their inheritance, this magnificent piece was created in 1911 for King George V to wear at the Delhi Durbar when he was crowned Emperor of India. In the same year, a crown was made for Queen Mary, consort to George V, to wear at her husband's coronation. 2 of the Cullinan diamonds once graced this beautifully simple crown, but they have since been replaced by crystal, and the original stones now form a brooch owned by the Queen. When Queen Mary broke with precedent and attended the coronation of her husband's successor, George VI, she caused a problem for the crown jewelers. What would the consort, Queen Elizabeth, now the Queen Mother, wear? This was the answer: a magnificent platinum crown which contains one of the most famous gems of them all, the Koh-i-Noor diamond. The legend of the Mountain of Light is at least 3,000 years old, though the cut diamond was not discovered until 1655 at the Kollur mine in India. The diamond spent the next 200 years between India and Persia, before being presented to Queen Victoria in 1850 by the East India Company. The diamond is reputed to bring bad luck to men, which is why it has never been set in a king's crown. The diminutive Queen Victoria is said to have found the imperial state crown too heavy, and the procedures for withdrawing it from the jewel house too cumbersome. And so, in 1870, this tiny crown, using the diamonds from a fringed necklace, was created for her. It weighs a mere 4 ounces, 113 grams, and most of the images of her from that time, including the stamps and coins, show her wearing it, perched on top of her bun. The crown of Mary of Medina is the consort's equivalent to the imperial state crown, though it has not been worn since George III's consort, Queen Charlotte, wore it following her husband's coronation. Like Queen Victoria's small crown, it was made for a tiny head. The crown, measuring only 5 inches, 127 millimeters in diameter, is now set with crystals, but like other crowns, diamonds were hired whenever it was worn. The diadem which goes with the crown is worn by the consort on her way to Westminster Abbey. Queen Adelaide, the childless consort to William IV, was the last to wear it. This Prince of Wales crown was made for the son of George II, Prince Frederick Louis, in 1728, not for use at the coronation, but when he took his seat in the House of Lords. The last Prince of Wales so to use the crown was the then future King Edward VII. A new Prince of Wales crown was created for Prince George, son of Edward VII. Later, George V's eldest son, Prince Edward, who abdicated in 1936 before his coronation, took the crown with him into exile in France. It was only added to the collection after his death in 1972. In order to ensure no other crowns ever leave the country, the security of the crown jewels has steadily increased ever since Colonel Blood's attempted theft. From that time, the regalia was displayed behind a stout iron grille, though, until a reputedly mad woman put her hands through this and pulled apart the arches of the crown of state, there was no glazing. Damage was reported to be in the region of 10 guineas. Considerably greater damage was narrowly avoided in 1841, and on this occasion, it was the very security itself which imperiled the collection. A fire broke out in a neighbouring storehouse. The only keys were in the possession of the Lord Chamberlain, not a resident of the Tower. There were no telephones to summon him. As Tower firemen fought the fire, a member of the city police force attacked the grille's hinges with axe and crowbar. A superintendent climbed through the narrow gap they created and passed the crown jewels to safety. A new jewel house was opened 5 months later and featured a central round showcase about which the public could circulate. But if they had sorted out the security, they had not resolved the problems of lighting and ventilation. The dark, damp jewel house was open for a mere 28 years before the collection's removal to new premises in the Wakefield Tower, where they remained for a century. As more and more visitors came to view the crown jewels, it became necessary to move their location. A new jewel house was constructed in 1967, yet even this became too small. So, in 1994, Her Majesty the Queen opened the new jewel house to serve as a showroom and strong room alike to accommodate even more visitors.
I now have great pleasure in declaring the new jewel house open.
Britain continues to use its magnificent collection of crown jewels, not only on display, but for the coronation of its monarchs and for the state opening of Parliament. Although over the centuries they've been the cause of strife, battles, loss of life, source of money, yet today millions of people feel it's worthwhile to come and look at these glittering objects and dream of their magnificence and take away these images of the crown jewels of the United Kingdom.